What's going on? It's Jason Heath here, and we're changing it up a little bit here in terms of format. I do an audio podcast called Contra-Race Conversations. You may know me from that, or you may have just randomly found me on YouTube, and here we are. I've done this for 14 years or something like that, and I've never really done much with video, but I've been getting better video these days, talking with folks on Zoom, and I thought I'd experiment with putting out at least some of the ones with better video quality here on YouTube. So this is one of those experiments. We're talking today with Andrew Goins, who is a bassist in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and is launching, with a few of my other favorite people in the bass world, the Texas Online Bass Camp. This is going to be June 1st through 4th. It's an amazing lineup of folks, including Dennis Whitaker, George Amarim, Jack Unziker, Grace Lewis, Mitch Mooring, who helps me on the podcast, Andrew himself, and a mindfulness coach named Travis Baird. So Andrew and I talk all through the details of this camp. Let's dig in. I have way too many questions and topics I want to talk about with you and I know you've got a heart out, so I'll just ask you up front. Please, we got to do this again because we could talk for an hour just about all those transition points. But let me start with, because as a former high school orchestra director myself and freelance life and studio teaching in different order than you did. But okay, what I've thought, I teach very little in terms of private lessons. I've got like my whopping one student or two students that I'm now teaching online. And I've taught online a little bit, but okay, 58 students teaching in person and now teaching them online, or a portion of them online, and that age group online. Like, what's it been like trying to do the private lesson thing not in person? I've thought a ton about this, and even way before the pandemic thought a lot about this. So what's it been like?
Well, it's certainly a reinvention of a wheel. I'll start there. It has been a learning experience, of course. What I have found is it's not as good as in person, of course. There's nothing about teaching that is as good online as in person. But at the same time, what all of my students really want is just something that's normal in their life. Right now, they have nothing that's normal in their life right now. Mm-hmm. And they have lost all of those social connections, and maybe occasionally they're getting together on a Zoom class or something like that. So what I've tried to do really is to teach the same way, to do things the same way. The biggest adjustment I've had to make is in how I teach. In the past, in person, I would have done a lot of playing along with them. Mm-hmm. And that's just not an option on any of these platforms because of lag and all the other various things, right? So I've had to do a lot more I do, you do type of teaching, which means I break things down into much smaller chunks now than I would have with them in person. And so things go a little slower with that. But at the same time, that's exactly how I was already teaching them to practice. So it wasn't completely new to them. They picked it up pretty quickly. The biggest challenges have been the myriad of technology situations and setups on the student's end. On my end, I'm rocking a USB mic, a laptop, a webcam, a mixing board, headphones. It's on the student's end. I've got a couple that still their option is a cell phone, right? And so,
man,
that's been the challenge for sure.
I saw a meme. I don't know if it came from you or who, but it was like somebody essentially did what you're describing, like a full professional studio setup for the teacher end, and the student was like screaming into a tin can. And
right.
And we were doing this program throughout the year here in San Francisco with 5 high school students and different San Francisco symphony bassists and local bassists. And we did our last one on Zoom. And I know a lot of people can relate to this, but so we had 5 kids, like 2.5 hours. One of them had a microphone. That was good. Okay. Or just a microphone. And that
Right.
20 minutes was like a beautiful 20 minutes. But the sound of like a Chromebook or an iPhone microphone trying to pick up. One poor kid, he was on, I mean, it's just what they have.
Right.
It on a Chromebook, he was standing behind a bright window. So he was like this ghost, you know, like, so you couldn't hear him or see him. That was, and I wasn't the clinician. I was just running tech, but that clinician was earning his keep.
Right. I've had an evolving set of email instructions to my students as we have experimented. First, it was, okay, we'll try all these different platforms depending on what you have available. Then it was at the end of that first week of teaching online, there was an email of, let's talk about how to set up your lesson space. And one of the big points was a window, were windows, right? Let's make sure that window is in front of you, not behind you. That'll be great lighting. It'll be wonderful. Let's make sure I'm not staring up at your ceiling. And I'd really like to see you and your bass. And certainly evolving technology as I will say this about Zoom, as many challenges as it presents, because it's not designed for what we're trying to do with it. I mean, that's no fault of Zoom's. They have been pretty responsive, adding the original sound option to the app, and that has certainly helped. And, you know, FaceTime has been relatively stable. It's still got some sound leveling that goes on. The biggest problem is just the frequencies of our instrument and the fact that our instrument is not entirely a directional instrument. So all these platforms are trying to read bass as background noise.
Yeah.
And it makes things challenging at times. To accommodate that, if I have a student who is having to use one of the less stable platforms for music, such as I have a couple of students who have Android devices, so we use Duo. And Duo is great for video calls and not fantastic for bass lessons, certainly. So for those students, I've had them submit to me videos occasionally, where then I can go listen to them and hear better their tone and what they're doing with dynamics, because those are the two biggest challenges in teaching those students, is hearing their tone and hearing if they're doing anything with dynamics, much less what they're doing, because Duo is trying to level it all out. FaceTime, I have students who are doing FaceTime do the same thing. Any student who's on a Chromebook, just because that lives in between mobile and desktop, I've been having them submit occasional videos, and they like it. They enjoy having something additional to do anyway, because they're bored. Frankly, they especially for some of my students, their school districts are being incredibly reasonable on how much work they're getting. And so they are excited to have something else to prepare to work towards.
Yeah, well, and that you know we function as you know, amateur psychologists, maybe not amateur psychologists, so often too. And I think about that with my couple students. It's like I just sent the confirmation email yesterday. I thought, like, dang, it's been a week. Like, it feels like it was like yesterday. And the weeks are blending together. And I know that, you know, if you think about all the circumstances in school where you're just one of many, you know, this is one of the few. The private lessons, one of the few times you really get to interact, which might have been why. We could talk about this for hours, but maybe let me just ask, because I just got so. Sure. I taught 7 years orchestra in suburban Chicago, and some similarities to Texas is its own whole thing, and being a head director in Texas is even like, you know, like probably a couple levels of intensity up from that. But like, were you thinking for a while about moving into private teaching, or like what were some of your reasons? I can guess maybe, but like what were some of your reasons for making that move? Because a lot of people would just absolutely die to have what it sounds like the job you're describing was. You know, I mean, that's like the holy grail for a lot of people in the music ed world.
Sure. So for whatever twist of fate that made it happen, my career for a long time had been to rebuild programs. Mm-hmm. Essentially, I would be approached by someone looking for a person who could come into a program that had either had a single event happen that had created instability or had longer term instability. And the reality, and I would take those when I felt they were appropriate and a good fit. And but at the same time, that is a relatively brutal way to be a teacher.
Yeah.
You know, I essentially was in a constant set of first years in a number of sequential jobs, right? Just because that was my mandate, was to bring change. And of course, no one likes change. And so I had been doing that for a number of years. And I for a number of different reasons, had hit a point where I was starting to think about it. And, you know, then I was also at the same time starting to have more and more opportunities, especially as a performer, that were, you know, directly colliding with my responsibilities as a 6A head high school orchestra program, which in Texas, 6A, that's the biggest classification of high schools. And so those two things were starting to collide more and more often. And I realized I was simply burning the candle at both ends. And the time was right. The time ended up being right. The program that I was transitioning at the time was in a great place. It was set up to have great growth over the next 4 or 5 years. And I just felt like it was a time where I had that opportunity and decided I wanted to take it. And I was also, I will say, being a head high school orchestra director, wasn't getting to teach as much as I wanted to either. And that was certainly part of it. There were, you know, a lot of administrative responsibilities and those sorts of things that I just felt like I wanted to teach more.
I fully get that. And I remember when I was teaching high school, walking by, because I had taught privately, and I would go into schools and I'd be in the lesson rooms and working. And then I remember as a director walking by and watching those private teachers teach and thinking, the grass for me was always greener on the other side. I mean, I liked a lot about the full-time job. And just briefly, one more thing. So you may very well have done TMEA sessions on like how to rebuild a program. I'm sure you probably have done something like that if you've done that for so many years. But like, I remember maybe it was Brian Wiss in the band world or somebody. Sorry, podcast listeners, this is getting really deep into music. But like, he talked about the 4 quadrants of jobs that you can step into, you know, when you're taking over. And there's like a director who's, we'll just use good and well-liked, right? Which is, if you're also good, that's probably the easiest in a lot of ways. And then not good and not well-liked is also kind of easy because it's like you can only go up. So the 2 tough ones were good but not well-liked. That was tough, but then not good, but well-liked was the toughest one. And I thought so many, and I was fortunate enough that all of the jobs, they were good and well-liked, maybe one of them not as well-liked, but it's certainly good, you know? And so, wow. Have you presented on that topic?
I haven't actually presented on that topic.
Okay.
I will say, especially given the realities of taking over programs and transitioning them and all of those sorts of things, there's a lot of elements of that I try to be very diplomatic about. Sure. In speaking with other people, certainly. And I will say too that every program is different. There's no one way to go through and transition a program. And so I don't know that I have a system that I could say, this is what I do, because it's a little different at every program. The only thing that's consistent for me when I've done something like that is I learned really early on in that process that there was no real benefit of trying to do the most important changes slowly. All that did was extend the difficulty of that change and give kids a false impression of what I was going to expect. So pretty early on, I kind of went the rip the Band-Aid off route on what those most critical changes were going to be. And certainly that put me into that not well-liked set of quadrants often. And that was okay. I, as a teacher, understand that it's not personal. As a teacher, they didn't know Andrew Goins, they knew Mr. Goins. And while those were very similar people, it wasn't exactly the same. So
that's good. Well, you and I can continue this conversation over a beverage at some point. That's
right.
In a less diplomatically sensitive area. But I'm totally fascinated. I thought a lot about that. But so speaking of programs, I guess, right. And when did you? Was this your idea to put together this online program, or were you chatting with folks, or like what was the genesis of this? And I've kind of noticed chatter about, so I kind of know, but just let everybody else know.
Right. So, I'm very fortunate to be friends with a lot of the people I consider to be the giants of bass pedagogy here in Texas, college professors, and many of the very people who are in fact a part of this online camp. And where the genesis of it was, as we were all inventing this wheel of online teaching, and frankly bemoaning the limitations of all this technology and the interface and not being able to work with our kids in person, that was absolutely a frustration I shared. But I've always been the kind of person that if I'm having those kinds of frustrations, rather than focus on the frustration, I'm going to focus on, okay, what can I do to solve this frustration? What can I do to make this at least better? I can't make it perfect, but what can I do to make it better? And as I started to explore that, and started a couple of different Facebook discussion groups with other private lesson teachers about that to share ideas, I started to realize, there's a lot of possibilities here to do things that simply aren't realistic normally. Perfect example, with my own studio, I started doing a weekly studio class that with my students spread all over a large metropolitan area like DFW was never an option, was never a possibility before. I also started teaching. There was one of my schools where I was teaching hired me to teach their beginner bass class online. And so through that, I started experimenting with these group sessions. And I realized, there's a ton of possibility here to bring these students together in some ways that just aren't realistic normally. At the same time, a number of camps that I normally teach at in the summer as bass faculty, of course, started being canceled because they're all hosted by universities, and that's just not happening. And so as I started seeing that and realizing that the normal, I had this item on my to-do list of send out summer camp information to my studio. And as I kept having to put that off, just waiting to see is there going to be anything left standing, I realized, hey, there's an amazing opportunity here. Normally, for doing some type of in-person camp, just the financial realities of it allow you to bring in one or two big name people, that sort of thing. And I through these discussions with other people, realized there's actually a great opportunity here for an amazing group of clinicians to be able to come together and present an experience that's, again, just not really realistic when we're talking about in-person things. And again, I take it back to in-person's better. I will absolutely acknowledge that any day. But this ability to bring in people from all over geographically, to work with students from all over geographically without anyone having to travel, presented these fantastic opportunities. And so I started putting it out there to some of the people I was considering being involved, and they all loved the idea and were absolutely willing to make it work. And, we talked about the technology and how we could handle that. And these group classes that I had been doing online had allowed me to experiment with some processes that I thought would make it work. And so then it was a matter of just coming up with a schedule that seemed like it would present everything. I'm in Texas. All-State's a big deal here, TMEA, all of that. But I didn't want it to just focus on something like that. I wanted it to be a more holistic bass player approach, because that's so important to me as a teacher to have that holistic approach. And so that was the genesis. That was where it all started, was just this realization that there are opportunities presented by these challenges that we could leverage to actually make something special.
Well, and you think it's cool because your clinicians are all from Texas, or it looks like from Texas. But Texas, I think everybody, certainly the U.S. population knows Texas is a big state. And George Amarim down in South Texas, driving up to Dallas, or Nick Scales out in West Texas coming out. So it's a cool way to pull, or Houston, and you got Dennis Whitaker and folks, and Grace Lewis, and Jack Unziker in your neck of the woods. Who else am I leaving out? Travis Baird, who seems like an interesting guy. I was just looking him up a little bit online too.
Yeah, the clinicians are fantastic. So the first person I approached about it, honestly, was Dennis. And it was because of his new series, his incredibly useful exercises, which I've been just eating up.
My copy's in the mail right now. I can't wait to. I've watched all the YouTube videos, and I've been practicing them. One of my private students has been going through them too. So yeah, I love that you started with that every day.
Right, exactly. And that was exactly it. I looked at those as I started to see his YouTube videos and went, how amazing would it be for students to get to just start a day with this, and to me, that was, again, as an orchestra director, as a bass teacher, I always kind of follow the same format in my teaching anyway: warm-ups, technique, rep. And so to me, that was sort of that right there. There's our warm-up, our technique. And so I contacted Dennis about it, and he loved the idea. He thought it was a great idea. And so then again, I'm good friends with Nick Scales and George Amarim. And so I contacted both of them, said, hey, would you want to be involved in this? And they were, again, fast to respond. They loved the idea. Contacted Jack Unziker, who I've known for quite a while up here in the Arlington area. And again, I knew he had just this past year been doing a lot of performance related things. So I thought, well, how perfect would it be to have someone come in and do a mini recital and answer some questions and things like that. And contacted Mitch because he's amazing. And I've had him work on my own bass before, driven it out there to him, and he's fantastic. And I know he does amazing presentations too, and understands working with students since he was a teacher himself as well. He was thrilled to do it. And Grace, of course, who is one of our up and coming young bass players, certainly. People probably know more who she is than they know who I am, I'm sure. And so how fantastic for these kids to get to talk to someone like her and get to ask this question, someone who's closer to them in age. And then, so Travis Baird, he's my one non-bass player in the group, but again was immediately one of the first people I spoke to. He has a doctorate in viola performance. He absolutely understands musicians, and is also huge in the entrepreneur world. He has a couple of different businesses, and one of them focuses on mindfulness, and that is something that, especially for me as someone who has led a rather stressful professional life, it has been a saving grace, honestly, something that has helped me keep my sanity. And in the music world, which can be, brutal to your ego, right? That's such an important thing. And so, and then he also understands bass players. His brother, his twin brother, is the bass professor, is one of the professors at USC, and so he and Ryan Baird, you may know Ryan, and so he again loved the idea and was excited. So all of these people, it just kind of was a perfect storm. All of these people who were excited to come on board, and willing to just make it work, basically willing to the way I think of it is willing to kind of jump off of that cliff with me into this experiment. I'm just hoping that I don't fail them on the technology side of things. That's really what I'm looking at. So as I got all these people on board, we realized, okay, well, there's some specific things that we need to put in place to make this work. And so as I thought about it, my initial idea was grand. And I realized, okay, I'm not sure how to facilitate this with multiple levels. So I need to focus this on a particular level of student so that we can just have one set of sessions. And I chose to go with more advanced high school students for a couple of reasons. One, they're more independent, meaning they're going to be able to handle the technology side of this and the challenges that inherently creates a little bit better. They're going to need a little less guidance on that. Also, frankly, part of it was the things I was wanting to bring into this were certainly some more advanced concepts. To have Nick Scales work on orchestral rep and be able to do it with standard excerpts was important to me. To be able to have some type of solo masterclass element was important. And all of those things were going to work just a little bit better with a more advanced high school student. And then in addition, because I am in Texas and these are all Texas clinicians, it just seemed natural with our all-state etudes coming out May 1st to be able to have an element there for those kids who want to start preparing those all-state etudes and have that to work on. So all of those things just leaned it towards being a more straightforward thing with this experiment if we focused on that advanced high school student. We also figured out pretty quickly as I was doing these group classes that I was doing, that bigger wasn't necessarily better. And so we decided we're going to limit the enrollment. And in talking to a couple of the clinicians, we all kind of settled on 20 as being a workable number of little boxes on the screen at one time, basically, and a workable number that will give all of those students still some good individual attention. And so we settled on that. And if we end up having so much interest in it that we can justify a second overflow week, we're actually looking at that as well, because we know we are limiting that enrollment to a pretty small number of people. And then the third thing we wanted to make sure was in place is some technology guidance for the students so that everyone, the students, our clinicians, could all have the best experience possible. So, we've indicated to the students in the kind of pre-registration instructions, really you need to be on a laptop or a desktop computer. A true laptop, not a Chromebook or a desktop, so that you're using the full desktop version of Zoom and have access to that full suite of audio settings that allow for a better experience. And I see you nodding your head and you understand exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's incredible. Come on, Zoom, just flip the switch. There must be some technical reason why you can't, but yeah, like the frustrations of trying to do anything not on your desktop. Or I'm a mobile guy. I love my iPad, but oh man, am I glad I got my main computer.
Exactly. So that was something we decided needed to be a requirement, along with some type of external microphone, because as good as, for instance, the built-in microphone on my Mac is, my external microphone, even though it's a cheap USB one off of Amazon, is absolutely better. And especially when you start adding the frequencies of a bass into the mix, it's just better. And so we decided that was going to be some of the kind of baseline technology requirements that we were going to put in place to participate, so that those students could play for the clinicians and experience and get good feedback, so that they could play in the solo masterclass and get good feedback. And we knew that was going to be a key element to them having a good experience and making it worth their time and making it be a valuable experience for them.
You know, nobody wants to be in this situation, but if I think about the silver lining, one thing might be a whole lot of people, hopefully, a whole lot of students are going to have a microphone or have a little bit better audio gear, because that's something you're going to use the rest of your life. Like even my first USB mic, I mean, like took the game up so much, and so like anybody involved in music in any capacity, you know, it's money well spent, and you don't have to buy $1,000 worth of gear to get, you know, a $30 to $50 investment will like level up, you know.
Yeah. The one that we have a link to on the page for any student who doesn't have one, I want to say right now is $35 on Amazon. It's the one that I'm using right now to talk to you. I'm not going to take credit. I actually got it as a resource from Andy Moritz down in Houston. And because he just happened to have one already. He and I were testing out this technology together before we rolled it out to students, just to try to break it first so we knew what to tell students. And as soon as I heard his, that he already had, I ordered one right then. and so fortunately had it within the first few lessons that I was doing. And the setup has certainly evolved since then, just as I've found more and more little things. And so, you know, that all of that experimentation has created the environment where I feel relatively confident that we can make something like this online camp work. There's some unique challenges, certainly, because it's not possible to play together on any of these with all the different lags and everything. So one of the things I've been experimenting with in the group classes I've been teaching is when I'm teaching, I just mute everyone. I just mute every kid. And then that way they can all hear me just fine. They can noodle around as bass players love to do anyway, and experiment with whatever I'm showing them and try it out without it being a disruption to anyone else in the class. And I can just keep on teaching. And then I've got them all trained that if they have a question while I'm teaching, before I get back to unmuting them and asking them, they can throw that question in the chat and it'll pop up. So I'll see it, you know, it lights up, and I've actually got it set where it'll ding. And they've got the little hand raise function that some of them have access to and some of them don't on their devices. I haven't figured that one out yet, but it's there for most of them. So there's different ways for them to be able to grab my attention, even though I have them muted. And what I've actually found is, in a lot of ways, that actually has some benefits over having to do that same thing live. If I'm teaching that beginner class, for instance, which I've done a few times live, I'm having to make sure those kids aren't noodling around while I'm playing, so that everybody can hear the instructions and all of that kind of stuff. And you know, some of these kids, they're going to learn it great by just me describing it to them and demonstrating. But some of them are going to learn it a lot better by just experimenting with it while they're getting the instruction. And so, again, that's one of those opportunities, those possibilities that the technology is providing that isn't actually realistic live, that has proven to be a benefit for some kids. And so that's the type of process we're planning to use for the camp. And I'm going to be there in every session, kind of moderating that for the clinicians, because, you know, I have the fortune as a teacher to have gotten to experiment with that. But if you haven't experimented with it, managing that and trying to teach what you want to teach at the same time, it is certainly a distraction to the teacher. So, you know, one of the parts of this camp is there's going to be a constant moderator involved, and that'll allow me, for the clinicians, to see those questions pop up. And if it's something that I know should be interjected right at that moment, I can go ahead and do that. Or if it's something that could wait until they're done with whatever they're showing the kids at that moment, we can do that. So it just helps those clinicians manage that process. It helps the kids know that their questions are still going to get addressed even in this online capacity, and just it makes it run smoother for everybody involved.
That is one of those advantages. That's true. I've noticed that a little bit, and it's kind of amazing to like be able to just press mute and let people, because it's not like, I mean, noodling's not all bad. In fact, it's good, and that having that physical, that kinesthetic experience, but at the same time, it slows everything down. And I think about how many like bass classes I've taught, even like the last couple of years here in San Francisco. It's like, all right, shh, quiet, listen, stop, no, look, so in a way that does it. Then you could, like you said, unmute certain individuals, ask a question, have that interaction. I should probably ask. So you got a hard limit, and then maybe extending it, which is very cool. That makes a lot of sense so everyone can get a little more time. Are you limiting it to folks just from Texas? Let's say someone in Oklahoma or Illinois is listening, and they're bored stiff from 7 weeks of try to slog through school online and want to do something different. Like, is it open to other people if?
Absolutely.
Just that age range?
Right. It's the only limitation that we've put in place is that they're a student entering grades 9 through 12 for next year. Just to keep it in that age range. Certainly the concepts that are going to be covered are going to be geared towards a more advanced student. So if it's someone who's less advanced, they are certainly welcome. They might feel pretty lost sometimes, certainly. But it's intended for that more advanced student certainly for this first go around. Again, it's all an experiment. So we're trying to keep the experiment a little bit more controlled this first time. But it's absolutely not limited to just Texas students. I wanted to make sure, again, that it was a holistic bass player approach. And so if you look at that schedule, the only thing that is Texas specific is an all-state masterclass each day on the all-state etudes. That's going to be 50 minutes long because we're putting a 10-minute break in between each session. So it's 50 minutes long. So it's just 50 minutes of each day. And even if the kid is not from Texas, those are still going to be great etudes for them to work on. I mean,
for sure.
We know what the two books are right now, and that's been released by TMEA. So one of them is going to be an etude from Samandal 30 Studies. I mean, that's, bread and butter of the bass world, right? And the other one is from the Le Bon etude book, which of course means it's going to be a lunch eating etude. We know that one. So, they will be great etudes for any student to work on for their technique, and regardless of whether they're from Texas or not. So certainly we would love to see students from anywhere, from all over. The primary reason we named it the Texas Double Bass Academy was simply because all of our clinicians were from Texas. I certainly know some amazing people outside of Texas like you, but at the same time, I wanted to mine the resources I had right here, people I've been friends with for a decade or more. And I think sometimes don't always get the opportunity and the recognition for the pedagogy geniuses that they are, really. And so I wanted to feature them. I wanted to feature all those great resources that are right here in my own backyard and involve them. So that's sort of how it's set up. And but the entire camp is very holistic bass player. The only thing I didn't end up including that I seriously considered was a jazz component. And it just got to, okay, I've got all these great things in here. Something's going to have to give. And so I decided, well, let's focus it on the orchestral side of double bass playing. And that way it's again, that more boxed for the experiment.
Yeah, no, I think it's great to frame it that way, because as soon as you open up something online, it's like, oh, well, we can do anything anywhere in the world, and there's just so much. So like keeping it focused, keeping it targeted toward those people entering high school, the 9 through 12 grades. You got a rock star list of clinicians, in my opinion, and knowing people that you've worked with for a long time, and it's evident to me looking through that the holistic bass approach, I think, and adding Travis into the mix, and then starting with with Dennis, and it's a beautiful camp. Well, okay, so folks listening, there's a limit. They might add another week if there's but 20 is not a lot of spots. So definitely, I'll link up to the website and Instagram and Facebook and everything for it. And we have to do another one of these, maybe in person if we ever are allowed to see each other again as humans. But man, I'd love to geek out with you on private teaching, school teaching, gigging in Texas. I'm long overdue for a visit to Dallas. I've had some great times in Dallas Fort Worth area.
I love it here. You know, the arts community here is just so rich. In both Dallas and Fort Worth. You know, sometimes I kind of live a little more on the Fort Worth side of town, and it gets overshadowed certainly by the Dallas, which is a much bigger setup. But, you know, to have two world-class symphonies, for example, within a 30-minute drive of my house is just an amazing thing. To have the world's premier wind ensemble here in town, non-military wind ensemble, and frankly, to get the opportunity to play with them. I every time I'm on that stage, they perform at the Meyerson most of the time, which is of course an amazing concert hall. It's where the Dallas Symphony plays, for those who don't know. And to get to sit on that stage and play with some of these amazing musicians, I sit there frequently and just wonder what I'm doing there, because it's just such an amazing experience. They're such amazing musicians, and that kind of thing. There's little regional orchestras all over the Dallas-Fort Worth area that are fantastic groups in their own right. Jazz groups, there's just so much going on in the arts around here, and I can't speak highly enough for how much I enjoy being a part of that.
Well, what a cool role as a bass player too, to play with the Dallas Winds, because the wind ensemble literature, you know, it's such a younger, except for Percy Grainger and a few other composers, but you know, there's so much interesting contemporary music. It's a gold mine in many ways for contemporary composers. So we could talk for an hour about this too, but like, you know, if you play, I was talking with some composer friends about this. If you get a chance to write for like a group like the Dallas Winds or the North Texas Wind Ensemble or something, they are going to work that piece for a long time, versus you write it for this not to rip on the San Francisco Symphony, I love them, but you're going to get your 4 rehearsals, a portion of each rehearsal, and one performance likely, and you got strength. I mean, it's and the bass parts, being a bass player in that, and the instrumentation, the texture, I've had some amazing experience. I was playing in a wind ensemble, much more amateur group in the Chicago area with the guy I replaced at one of my jobs. And it was some of the most fun I've had as a player, actually. And that wasn't what you're talking about. This was definitely more kind of like, I teach band and it's fun, you know, but oh man, it was so fun to explore those pieces.
Oh yeah. I play so much more new music playing with that ensemble than I ever play with any orchestra, of course. And again, I love orchestral music. I mean, give me a Beethoven symphony to play and I'm going to be happy forever. But to also do, you know, John Mackey or Omar Thomas and Maslanka, all of these band composers, which as a musician put me through some mental paces. You know, just earlier this year we played the Higdon percussion concerto, and you know, counting like I don't have to ever do with an orchestra, and you know, all of those things. They just put out a CD last year of all Mackey music, and I got to be a part of that recording project, and to be able to play that much new music and just live in those tonalities and those possibilities, and as a bass player to often serve a very different role than I serve in an orchestral bass section or a pit orchestra or anything like that. You know, it's often even a mix of orchestral and jazz, or sometimes I'm the percussion instrument along with the percussion section. And, you know, Mackey is very fond of his slat pits and that sort of thing. And so it's it's actually such a wonderful experience to get to explore that much new music, and I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, let's do a round 2 again for sure on Eddie, or round 3 or 4 or 5. But congratulations on getting this off the ground. It's a really exciting lineup, and yeah, I'll make sure that folks check it out. So that's a look inside this new camp. We've got links in the description below to everything about this camp. Let me know in the comments if you like this format. Do you like these video podcast versions? I can't really do it with every single one because sometimes we have super crappy connections. Well, I guess we could, but you don't want that. But with these that turn out better like this, I'm going to try playing around, and I'd love your thoughts. Thanks for watching. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next video.